Today, we're getting into some really interesting source material. You've shared this essay, Abercrombie's The Devils, a meditation on monstrosity.
That's right, and we're using it as a lens, really, to unpack Joe Abercrombie's novel, The Devils.
Exactly. So our mission, if you like, is to see what this analysis tells us about the book's approach to genre, to, well, morality and institutions, all viewed through fantasy's sometimes pretty harsh light.
And the essay makes it clear right away, doesn't it? This isn't just standard fantasy fare. It argues Abercrombie takes those familiar structures, the quest, the band of companions, the magic, and fundamentally twists them, uses them to challenge our assumptions about heroes, villains, even things like faith and control.
Right. It sets it up as more than just grimdark. It's positioned as a kind of masterclass in using the genre to explore some, well, pretty weighty philosophical ideas. So let's dive in. Let's unpack what this analysis says is really going on in The Devils.
Okay, so starting with what the essay calls the core subversion, how does Abercrombie, according to this view, take grimdark and sort of elevate it?
Well, the analysis suggests it's about more than just bleakness. It's about interrogating the actual bones of epic fantasy, stripping away the usual glamour.
Revealing the grotesque and deeply human truths beneath, as the essay puts it.
Exactly. That phrase really nails it, and it makes a key point. It's not just that monsters exist in this world. The story is about becoming a monster.
And why that might sometimes be necessary just to survive.
Which takes us right to the structure. You know, on the surface, it looks like a classic quest. You've got this disparate group, an important mission, very familiar fantasy setup.
But the analysis says, hold on, it's not that at all. It's actually an anti-quest. Precisely. The motivation isn't noble. It's not heroic. It's described as pure pragmatism. And the characters, they aren't heroes. The essay calls them instruments of a deeply cynical religious institution.
Ah, yes, the Chapel of Holy Expediency. That name alone.
Dripping with irony, as the essay notes.
It really is.
And the analysis presents this chapel, which feels, more like a bureaucracy than anything divine, as a kind of stand-in for how power often works. It hides its real motives behind this facade of morality or faith.
So Abercrombie's using satire here, and wit, laying bare how easily faith gets weaponized and how truth just becomes flexible when power's the end goal. According to this reading, anyway.
Yes, but what's interesting, and the analysis points this out too, is that it's not all cynicism. Despite the darkness, there are these moments, they're rare, maybe, but they're there. Moments of unexpected tenderness, loyalty, mercy, even love.
And the essay argues that because they are so rare in this brutal world, they actually shine all the brighter. It keeps the book from just being relentlessly bleak, I suppose.
Which brings us nicely to the characters. Starting with Brother Diaz. He's the protagonist, sort of.
Yeah.
A low-ranking monk who gets suddenly promoted, basically, to be the vicar for this very questionable chapel.
Right, and then he's thrown into this brutal journey, escorting a potential heir across this chaotic landscape. The analysis suggests his whole path is just this intense test of his faith, his humanity.
And he's not alone. The companions he travels with get a lot of focus in the essay. They're called, memorably, a band of monstrous mirrors.
Definitely not your charming rogues or noble warriors.
No, not at all. Each one is described as a kind of mirror reflecting a different face of monstrosity. We've got a vampire clinging to elegance while rotting inside, a Viking werewolf who's as much victim as predator, a necromancer. You get the idea.
Yeah, quite the crew.
But here's what the essay calls Abercrombie's greatest trick: empathy. Because these characters are, objectively awful in many ways, outcasts, murderers, liars. And yet, the analysis argues they're drawn with such psychological precision.
That you understand them. Maybe even root for them sometimes.
Exactly, despite what they do. It connects to that idea the essay raises about the fallibility of moral categories.
Right, like what makes someone a devil? Is it inherent, or is it the story that gets told about them?
So this group, this fellowship, if you can call it that.
Yeah.
It's nothing like Tolkien's, is it? The analysis calls it an inverse.
Yeah, their unity isn't based on shared values or trust.
No, it's built on binding magic, blackmail, and necessity. Much darker foundations.
A fellowship forged in fire and fear. And the analysis argues that this actually makes it all the more believable. That kind of messy, reluctant connection feels, well,
real. And shifting to the writing style itself, the analysis really emphasizes Abercrombie's prose. Described as sharp as ever cutting, sardonic, and often laugh-out-loud funny in its darkness.
And the dialogue, it crackles with tension and subtext. It also makes an interesting point about language itself being a tool, not just for communication, but for world building, for character.
You really see that, don't you? How a character speaks their rhythm, their word choices, reveals so much about their background, how they cope. Sarcasm as a shield, maybe. Silence as resistance. Language is a weapon, but also maybe a refuge sometimes.
Which flows naturally into how the book explores truth and fiction and just the raw power of stories. The whole narrative, according to this reading, seems to hinge on belief, what people believe to be true about history, identity, destiny.
And the analysis makes a pretty chilling observation here. Stories have power, yes, but in this world, it's almost always a corrupting power. It suggests mythology and propaganda are indistinguishable when both are told with conviction.
Wow, that resonates.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And you see this play out in how the book engages with the fantasy genre itself. Abercrombie clearly knows the lineage, Tolkien, Martin, etc. He uses those expectations you bring as a reader.
But takes the familiar shape of epic fantasy and just inverts it all.
Pretty much. Battles aren't glorious spectacles. Kings and thrones don't bring justice. Magic isn't wondrous, it's often grotesque, unsettling.
But the analysis isn't saying he's just tearing the genre down. It argues he's actually evolving it, showing that fantasy doesn't need to be pure escapism to be, well, meaningful.
Right. It can be uncomfortable, it can be disturbing, and still transformative. This perspective suggests the future of fantasy might lie in really interrogating those traditions, asking what those old stories really teach us, and if we still want to believe them.
Which brings us to the essay's conclusion, where it frames the devils as a mirror.
Yes, it calls it a mirror reflecting the darkest parts of human nature with unflinching clarity. A story full of monsters that kind of forces you to look at yourself and ask, what actually makes someone monstrous?
And even though it takes you through all this violence and manipulation, the analysis finds these scattered but important glimpses of dignity, of connection.
But, and this is crucial, the essay stresses this isn't meant to be a comforting read. It specifically says it will not comfort you.
It's designed to challenge you, maybe make you laugh at things you feel you shouldn't, leave you feeling unsettled.
And, maybe most importantly, the essay suggests it will stay with you long after you turn the last page.
So, wrapping up our deep dive into this analysis of the devils, the core takeaway seems to be how Abercrombie uses that familiar fantasy framework to really push back against our assumptions about heroes, villains, faith, power, all of it.
Yeah, the analysis paints it as this mirror, like we said, making us confront some uncomfortable stuff about human nature and really question how we define monstrosity.
And it's clear from our source material, this is definitely not a story that gives you easy answers.
Not at all. And maybe that's the final thought to leave you with, pulled from the analysis itself. The best stories, maybe, don't give you those easy answers. They make you sit with the hard questions.
And the devils, based on this reading, certainly seems to do that.
It really does.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing this really insightful source material and joining us for this deep dive.